Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Lunch Table Podcast with Dylan and Akram. For this episode, we are diving into Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, now out in theaters. Spoilers ahead, guys, so you've been warned. Should you choose to accept, please leave a like and a comment. Anything helps the channel. So, Akram, what'd you think of this movie?
I loved it. I really thought it was a great ride. I can't wait for part 2. I think there's a lot of questions they leave at the end to get you excited for part 2, which will come out next year. The antagonist is really different than what we've seen before in the past, so I think they're dealing with a lot of interesting concepts. And of course, the other characters I think are brilliant as well. We'll get more into that. Why don't we start with your thoughts, or get your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, like you said, it was a lot different from what we've seen in the previous movies, but it still has that same kind of Mission Impossible flavor. The villain is very interesting, I must say, in this one, because we've never seen anything like this before. At least in the Mission Impossible movies, we've seen kind of like similar antagonists in other movies, such as like Stealth, where like, you know, AI is kind of introduced. So it's kind of funny when you say, but in this movie, Tom Cruise fights AI.
Yeah.
That's the central premise.
That's what we need
of the movie. You know, Elon must have been helping him through the movie. But no, it was really interesting, and I like how they kind of set up the beginning of the movie, where we kind of get a feel for this AI, which they call the Entity, and it's kind of like this rogue program that sabotages a lot of information, and it kind of disappears like a ghost, almost like a phantom. And the way they like talk about it in this movie, and the way it feels like its own character is like very creepy. It's almost has like these kind of thriller elements thrown into it. So I want to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the movie. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, Eagle Eye with Shia LaBeouf. I felt like a lot of movies in the past dealt with AI, but not to this extent. This one feels a lot more real, and it's really worrying me right now, I have to admit, because there was a lot of things. I think some of the dialogue, too, they displayed it in a really interesting way that got me questioning how things are, especially presently. So, I think it's really interesting that they're going to split it into 2 parts as well. And so we're continuing off with this AI threat. And it's also really challenging too. Like, how do you go up against something that is a step ahead of you, no matter what, right? It's mathematical. How do you defeat that? So of course it's Mission Impossible. So it really feels like the stakes are extremely at an all-time high. There isn't really a human element, that is controlling this weapon. The weapon is free of that. So it's really something that I think it's really frightening. But I think it also leads to a really surprising type of character that we really don't know what would happen, because we don't actually know its motivations or anything like that too. It doesn't really have any, right? So
yeah, for sure. I think that's the scary part about it, is like, how do you, like you said, like, how do you fight something that is like 10 steps ahead of you? And I think it presents a challenge not only for Ethan, but also for the audience. It's like, I think the great thing about the Mission Impossible movies is that it challenges your comfort zone with the stakes, but also like your knowledge. So it's like, what do you really know, right? And the great thing about this movie, it challenges everybody. Like, nobody can trust what they know anymore, because it could all be falsified. And that's one of the big themes, is like the truth. What happens when the truth that you know is altered to, you know, fit a weapons agenda, right? And we see like governments are like literally like copying their information onto like actual like analog paper, because they're scared of you know what's going to happen if they steal this information, and it you know, they turn into something that's wrong. And we see allies and enemies, you know, countries turning into World War III, right? So I think it's a great kind of response to the times that we're living in right now, as we're, you know, talking about AI and the development of technology, and what is even private anymore, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think what's really frightening is the amount of access this thing has, and the amount of things that it can go wrong too. With this type of enemy that you're fighting, it's just you're fighting something that seems almost as if it's like weather, or you know, it's
It's a
I think
force.
it's a force, exactly, and that's so great for the next villain. I feel like that's what Mission Impossible needed. Instead of these type of archetypal villains, you have something that's like this, albeit sort of kind of archetypal, like I mentioned before, Eagle Eye or Stealth or something like that. But still, nevertheless, it's not so much
Mhm.
of a character; it's actually a force. So
Mhm.
it is a mission, indeed. That's impossible. So
Yeah.
let me get your thoughts on some of the side characters.
Yeah, well, of course, we had, of course, Ving Rhames as Luther. It's great to see him back. Of course, Simon Pegg as Benji. I feel like they're such a cool like buddy cop duo.
Yeah,
I loved them in the last three movies, so I was great to see them back here. Of course, seeing Rebecca Ferguson back as Liza, I think her name is.
yeah.
She was great. Unfortunately, she had to die in this movie. That last fight with Gabriel. But it's kind of a setup for this new character that we see, perhaps potential love interest played by Haley Atwell, Grace. So she's kind of like a thief character, but she's got like her own, unique set of skills too. It was kind of cool seeing her chemistry with Ethan and Tom Cruise, of course. They kind of bounce off each other, right? They're kind of like this cat, almost like Spider-Man and
Right.
Catwoman, almost in a way. And it was just funny, like seeing them like go through all these like car chases, and they're trying to avoid like all these different, parties. Because the big thing about this movie is that everybody's after this key. This key controls something that can defeat the entity. So all these different countries and Kittredge is trying to get this key too. It's scary to think about like how these countries are treating this entity, because it's like they don't want to kill it, they want to control it. And Ethan is the only one that wants to kill it because he knows that this is bad for everybody. And of course, Ethan is always like the moral high ground, so he has to be on top of everybody. So it's interesting to see like he's at odds not just with like his enemies but also his allies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I come back to the point about how realistic this movie is, and I think that's really important, and especially in an action movie like this. And I love that Mission Impossible is really transformative through the years with different types of villains, and then the time changes, and then also the type of tone that changed. Speaking about that and the side character stuff, let me get your thoughts on something that I think is really prominent in Mission Impossible movies, the stunts. One of my favorite ones was the train scene. Let me get your thoughts.
It's funny because I just watched Indiana Jones recently, and that also had a train sequence. I guess like everybody loves train sequences this year, but it still felt unique, and it was still really cool how they did it. And it was cool to see so many different characters have these different dialogues and motivations inside this. It's a very compact setting, but there's so much going on in it. And Ethan doesn't show up until like towards the end of that sequence, and it's really cool like how he does it. He does the ride off the cliff, and then he parachutes onto the train. I thought that was really cool. They always go like bigger and bigger with the stunts, which I really appreciate. They managed to outdo themselves. Like I think I haven't watched the last two recently, but I remember Ghost Protocol when he was climbing that building in Dubai.
Yeah.
And then even in the beginning too, they had like this cool sequence where it was like a sandstorm, and him and Liza were fighting like these mercenaries. I thought that was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the train sequence was awesome. It really felt like lives were at stake, and they were like coming this close to like ending it all. But I love that every character kind of like set this piece in motion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I worry. Do you think that this next part 2 will be the last movie? Do you really think? Because Tom Cruise has said that if it's up to him, he could play it forever. But I don't know how to take that, really. I got a feeling it will be the last movie, but what do you think, actually?
I think it might be the last for Tom Cruise.
Oh.
But I think it can still live past him, because the whole point of Mission Impossible is that the roster keeps changing, because the world has different missions, and we've seen a lot of characters that we thought were gonna last long end up dying, or they go off, or they end up being like traitors, right? So perhaps this could be like Ethan's last outing, and then maybe he retires, because it seemed like in this movie like they were trying to recruit Grace, into the IMF. So perhaps when she starts building her set of skills, she could take over, or we could see perhaps a spin-off. I mean, Fast and Furious did it with Hobbs and Shaw, so I wouldn't be surprised if excuse me, Mission Impossible wants to do their own spin-off, or perhaps like their own like kind of revitalized TV series too. I could see that in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I think that would be cool, like returning back to the roots or something. It's a shame, these past years, everything has been ending, or at least alluded to ending. It's really crazy. It makes me feel like, I don't know, left out or something. It hurts my feelings. I don't know.
Okay, Bo.
Yeah, and that's a plug. There you go, guys. Check out our Bo's Afraid review. All right. So, what would you rate Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1?
The last couple Mission Impossible movies, I wasn't really huge fan of. Ghost Protocol I thought was fun, but then everything after, I mean, we only had 2 movies, but I feel like they were kind of like lackluster, like kind of okay. This one really like blew my socks off, I'm not gonna lie, and I can't wait to see what part 2 brings. So I feel like I said, it's a great kind of response to our current events. It talks a lot about social issues, especially with technology and social media. So I'm glad that they kind of like integrated those ideas and those issues into this movie and made it seem like it's actually like a threat that our own world is facing. So take that with a grain of salt, but it's a great movie. I think everybody should watch this movie, actually.
I agree. I loved your point on that. Absolutely. It's strange as we grow and grow, we start emphasizing more with these characters and also the struggles that they go through. And it's really interesting that now we're finally in the cusp of seeing it end. I hope it doesn't, but I guess it actually will. So yeah, I would definitely give it a 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed this movie a lot.
Me too. Mm-hmm.
And my first Mission Impossible movie, seeing it in the theaters ever.
Oh,
so
wow.
Yeah, that's pretty
guys,
crazy.
watch this in either IMAX or Prime, because it's definitely worth it. Seeing like the scale of it, it's so nice when you see it like for this type of movie. It's nice seeing it in large scale.
Well, there you go, guys. You heard it here. Well, Agent, why don't you take us away?
Well, guys, thank you for sticking around. If you guys are fans of Mission Impossible, we just did a revisited review as well, where we talked about some of the previous Mission Impossible movies, so check that out. If you want to get hyped for the new movie, check out all our playlists, all our content. We have plenty of reviews, plenty of revisiteds as well. We just did Indiana Jones, of course, for the new movie. But yeah, leave a like, sub, anything helps the channel, guys. But until then, thanks for having lunch with us.
See you guys.